Have you ever stopped to think that maybe your search for God is going in the wrong direction? Perhaps you have looked for signs in the sky, answers in distant places, confirmations in people, rituals, temples, altars and sacred words, but still felt a strange emptiness, as if something inside you remained closed. What if the greatest spiritual mystery was not hidden in a mountain, in a holy city, in an ancient religion, or in a temple built by human hands, but in a place much closer, so close that you spent your entire life looking out without realizing that you were carrying the door to the sanctuary within your own chest? Imagine a man crossing deserts, climbing mountains, entering grand temples, kneeling before altars, lighting candles, repeating prayers, seeking teachers, books, and divine signs. He walks for years, perhaps a lifetime, convinced that God is always a little further away, always in the next place, in the next revelation, in the next spiritual experience. But at the end of this long pilgrimage, he discovers something disconcerting. The door he was looking for everywhere was inside him. God's holy temple was not just a stone building. The true temple was interior. The altar was hidden in consciousness. The sanctuary was covered in the noise of the mind. And the divine presence, which seemed distant, was silently waiting for him to learn to enter into himself. This is one of the great illusions of humanity. Looking for God outside while the inner sanctuary remains closed. Since ancient times, human beings have erected temples, built altars, created symbols, rites, ceremonies, and external paths to touch the sacred. And this has its value because the physical temple can inspire, the altar can remind, the ritual can direct, the word can awaken. But Jesus pointed to something deeper. He showed that the external sacred is just a map. The map may indicate the path, but it is not the destination. The stone may represent the temple, but it does not replace the living temple. Religion can point to God, but it cannot by itself open the secret chamber of the human soul. When Jesus spoke of the kingdom, he was not just announcing a distant reality in the future or a place separate from human life. He spoke of a more intimate dimension. A spiritual reality that needs to be perceived, awakened, and recognized. The kingdom is not tied to an address. The kingdom does not depend on a sacred geography. The kingdom begins when consciousness awakens to what has always been hidden beneath layers of fear, guilt, desire, vanity, distraction, and forgetfulness. That's why so many people frequent sacred places, hear sacred words, repeat sacred phrases, but continue to feel that something essential has not yet opened within them. And why does this happen? Because human beings are afraid of inner silence. It is easier to travel far than to sit in front of your own soul. It's easier to look for external signals than to face internal noises. It is easier to wait for someone to deliver a ready-made answer than to cross the invisible desert of one's own consciousness. Silence reveals things that haste hides. It shows wounds, masks, hidden desires, false identities, and thoughts that govern life without being noticed. Therefore, many prefer to seek God in noisy places, in quick emotions, in easy promises, because entering the inner temple requires courage. Jesus did not come to destroy the external sacred, but to reveal that it was just the shadow of a greater mystery. The stone temple was a symbol. The living temple is the awakened consciousness. The outer altar was an image. The inner altar is the purified heart. The visible pilgrimage was preparation. The true pilgrimage takes place within the being. And perhaps this is the truth that bothers the most. The biggest obstacle between you and God is not distance. It is not time. It is not the lack of rituals, nor the absence of holy places. The biggest obstacle is the lack of perception. God may be near, but the scattered mind lives far away. The sanctuary may be within, but the sleeping consciousness passes by its door without recognizing it. So before I continue, I want you to stay with me in this video, because what we're going to explore here isn't just a pretty idea about spirituality. It's a key. It is a call to look inside with different eyes. And while you watch, leave this sentence in the comments. I want to open the inner temple. Write this not just as a comment, but as a sign of intention, as if you are telling your own soul that the time has come to stop running away from the silence. Because if the sacred temple of God is within us, an inevitable, profound, and perhaps uncomfortable question arises. Why, then, does this temple remain closed to so many people? We are living in days when teachers' eses are being fulfilled before our eyes. But the majority still walk in darkness, trapped in incomplete truths that have been carefully hidden from humanity over the centuries. Now think, what if precisely what was taken from the scriptures contained answers that you have been looking for years? Answers that can illuminate your path, strengthen your faith, and reveal the true purpose of Jesus' coming. Therefore, I prepared this powerful digital book for you, Censored Gospels, the words of Jesus that were removed. This book is not just a read, it is a spiritual awakening, a tool made for those who want to go beyond the surface, free themselves from manipulation, and reconnect with the authentic Christ, without filters, without distortions, and without human interests. By purchasing this material, you not only access a hidden truth, but you also directly support my work and the continuation of this independent research, allowing this message to continue reaching more people. Download right now. The link is available in the first pinned comment. But be careful, as it contains spiritually sensitive information. This material can be removed from the air at any time. Ensure your access while the link is still active. If you are ready for this awakening, come back here and write, Amen. That will be your leap of faith. And today, God can open a door you never knew was about to open. And B, but if this temple is within us, why does it remain closed to so many people? This question is deeper than it seems, because it forces us to look at a very well-known scene from Jesus' teachings with different eyes. When we hear about Jesus entering the temple and expelling the merchants, we often imagine only an external, historical, visible event, a moment in which he revolts against those who transformed the sacred place into commerce. But there is a deeper layer to this scene. There is an occult, spiritual, symbolic, and psychological teaching, because when Jesus overturns the tables of the money changers and expels those who are trading inside the temple, he is not just showing indignation at religious abuse. He is revealing something about the human soul. He is showing that no one can encounter the divine presence while allowing their inner temple to be transformed into a marketplace. Think with me for a moment. If the true holy temple of God is within us, then the merchants are not just outside either. They can also be inside us. They appear as internal forces, repetitive thoughts, hidden fears, disordered desires, silent vanities, old guilt, constant anxieties, and false identities that occupy the place where silence, light, prayer, consciousness, and the presence of God should exist. The problem is that these internal traders don't come screaming. They do not appear saying that they came to desecrate the temple of the soul. They disguise themselves as need, protection, justice, ambition, prudence, self-esteem, survival. And, little by little, what should be a sanctuary becomes a fair of thoughts, a constant negotiation, a noisy internal space where everything demands attention, everything demands a response, everything wants to buy and sell something. Fear, for example, is one of the first merchants to settle in the inner temple. He enters promising safety. He says, I'm here to protect you. I am here to prevent you from suffering. I'm here to stop you from being disappointed. But in reality, fear sells false security. He convinces the person not to trust, not to move forward, not to surrender, not to listen to the spiritual call, not to enter into silence, not to open up to God. Fear always takes a toll. He demands peace. Take faith, take courage, collect inner freedom. And many people kneel before this merchant without realizing it. They say they trust God, but they live ruled by fear of the future, by fear of rejection, by fear of loss, by fear of judgment, by fear of being abandoned, by fear of looking inside and discovering truths that they spent years trying to hide. Then comes the ego, perhaps the most cunning merchant of all. The ego does not sell security. He sells identity. He says, "You are what others think of you. You are your name, your image, your story, your position, your pain, your success, your failure, your appearance, your opinion." The ego takes the soul, which was born to be God's living temple, and convinces it that it is just a showcase. So the person starts to live trying to prove something. Prove that you are strong, prove that you are special, prove that you know more, prove that he suffered more, prove that you deserve more, prove you're right. Prove that you are spiritual. And here there is a huge danger, because even the spiritual quest can be captured by the ego. The person talks about light, but wants applause. F-wing of humility, but desires superiority. He talks about awakening consciousness, but uses knowledge to feel above others. This is one of the signs that the inner temple is still full of merchants, when even God becomes an instrument to feed the vanity of the eye. And there is also guilt. Guilt is another merchant who occupies the inner sanctum and sells punishment. It presents itself as repentance, but it is not true repentance. Repentance awakens, heals, transforms, and brings a person closer to God. Guilt, when it becomes prison, paralyzes. She says, "You are not worthy. You have done too much wrong. You cannot approach the sacred. You do not deserve peace. You need to keep punishing yourself." And so the person begins to confuse God with constant condemnation. She no longer prays to encounter the divine presence. She prays like someone trying to pay an unpayable debt. He no longer seeks the inner kingdom with confidence, seeks in fear of being rejected. And this merchant turns the altar of the soul into a court. Everything becomes an accusation, everything becomes weight, everything becomes a bitter memory. But Jesus did not come to keep human beings trapped in guilt. He came to open a door of transformation. But while guilt rules the inner temple, the person cannot hear the deep voice of God. Because the accusation speaks too loudly, the vanity also has its table set up inside the temple. And perhaps this is one of the most difficult to recognize, because she knows how to dress up in beautiful things. Vanity sells approval. She says, "You will only be valuable if you are admired. You will only have peace if you are recognized. You will only be someone if others validate your existence." Didu. Then the person begins to live, looking at the eyes of others. She doesn't enter the inner temple because she is too busy trying to decorate the facade. She doesn't listen to the soul because she is too busy thinking about the image. She does not seek the presence of God in silence because she is addicted to applause, to comparison, to the need to look good, to look strong, to look enlightened, to look happy. And see how subtle this is. Often the person is not seeking God. They are seeking the feeling of being seen as someone who seeks God. There is a profound difference between true spirituality and spiritual performance. The inner temple does not open before a beautiful mask. It opens as the mask begins to fall. Don't waste any more time living with this burden. Get the digital book, Censored Gospels, the words of Jesus that were removed now, and discover how to apply these powerful teachings in your daily life. Attention, stock is limited and running out quickly. Click now and start your journey towards the peace and confidence you deserve. What about disordered desire? This merchant is seductive. It does not threaten like fear. It does not accuse like guilt. It does not show itself like vanity. It offers fleeting pleasure. He says, "Just one more time, just a little more, you deserve it. This will fill the void. This will ease your pain. This will make you forget." But desire without conscience does not fill the temple. He occupies it. It creates dependencies, distractions, impulses, attachments, and pursuits that never end. The soul feels thirsty for God, but tries to drink from sources that do not satisfy. He feels hungry for meaning, but feeds on stimuli. He misses the eternal, but gets lost in the immediate. And the most dangerous thing is that disordered desire rarely presents itself as an enemy. It presents itself as relief, but then it becomes restless, empty, and more thirsty. It's as if the human being is in front of a sacred door, but every time he almost enters, something pulls him towards a new distraction, a new urgency, a new promise of quick pleasure. And then anxiety appears, this merchant that seems to live in the modern mind. Anxiety sells control over the future. She says, if you think enough, suffer enough, foresee enough, imagine all the dangers, maybe you can control what hasn't even happened yet. But this is an illusion. Anxiety does not control the future. It steals presence. It takes the person out of the now, out of the body, out of prayer, out of inner listening. It fills the temple of consciousness with voices, scenarios, worries, haste, and imaginary threats. And when the temple is full of anxiety, one cannot perceive God, even though God is near, not because God has moved away, but because the mind is filled with noise. It's like trying to hear a soft voice in a screaming crowd. The sacred often speaks quietly, but anxiety turns everything into alarm. Therefore, when Jesus expels the merchants from the temple, we can see a powerful image of inner purification. He shows that the temple was not made for commerce, but for fellowship. The temple was not made for negotiation, but for presence. The temple was not made for vanity, fear, guilt, anxiety, and directionless desire. The temple was made for the divine flame, for the encounter with the Father, for the awakening of conscience, to living prayer, to inner truth. Jesus didn't just throw men out of a stone temple. He revealed that no one finds God while allowing their soul to be turned into a market. And here it is important to understand one thing. This purification is not empty moralism. It is not about looking at yourself with hatred, nor about rejecting your own humanity, nor about pretending to be an artificial holiness. True spiritual purification is a deep cleansing of that which occupies the sacred space of consciousness. It's starting to notice which thoughts buy your attention every day, what fears govern your choices, what guilt defines your relationship with God, what desires drag you away from your essence, what vanities prevent you from being simple, what anxieties take you away from the present moment, because we can only expel the merchants we can recognize. While they remain invisible, they continue to negotiate within us. Maybe you know someone who lives searching for a spiritual answer but can't spend 5 minutes in silence with themselves. Maybe that person is you. Perhaps you have already felt that there is something divine within you, a kind of calling, a longing for God, a desire to live more truthfully. But whenever you try to approach that inner sanctuary, something distracts you, weighs you down, accuses you, or pulls you back to the surface. And that's exactly where Jesus' teaching becomes so strong. He doesn't just invite us to admire the temple, he calls us to clean it up. He doesn't just call us to talk about God. He calls us to prepare the inner space for God to be perceived. This cleansing begins when you observe without running away, when you realize fear and don't let it become your master, when you see the ego and don't confuse it with your true identity, when you recognize guilt but don't allow it to destroy your hope, when you notice vanity and choose simplicity, when you see disordered desire and begin to seek a greater hunger, a purer thirst, a more real presence, when you feel anxiety trying to control the future and return, little by little, to the now, to breathing, to prayer, to the center. This is opening the way inside the temple. This is starting to turn the internal tables. This is to stop allowing any force to turn the soul into commerce. And perhaps this is one of the most difficult parts of the spiritual journey, because many people want to find God without dealing with internal clutter. They want light without facing the shadows. They want peace without abandoning the noise that feeds them every day. They want the inner kingdom, but they do not want to dislodge the merchants who occupy their secret rooms. But the sacred temple does not fully reveal itself where everything is being sold, negotiated, fought over, and noisy. Before the presence is perceived, the space needs to be recovered. Before the altar burns again, what defiles the altar must be removed. Before consciousness awakens, it needs to stop serving so many internal masters. Because when the merchants are expelled, something frightening appears: silence. And it is precisely in this silence that many begin to notice something that was previously hidden by the noise of the mind, by desires, by guilt, by fear, by anxiety, and by all those internal voices that occupied the temple of the soul. When the noise subsides, when the tables begin to be turned within consciousness, when that which profaned the inner sanctuary begins to lose strength, a subtler, deeper, and more mysterious barrier appears before the human being. It's not a stone wall. It is not a door locked from the outside. It is not a physical distance between you and God. It's a veil, an inner veil, an invisible layer that separates ordinary consciousness from divine consciousness, superficial perception from spiritual perception, sleeping man from waking man. And perhaps this is one of the greatest mysteries of the spiritual path. God can be closer than we imagine, and yet seem distant. The divine presence can be at the center of our very being, and yet we spend our entire lives feeling like it is somewhere unreachable. It's as if there is something covering the eyes of the soul, something that does not prevent God from being present, but prevents human consciousness from perceiving this presence. And here is a phrase that needs to be felt deeply. The veil does not hide God from you. The veil hides you from yourself. Many people spend their lives asking, "Where is God? Why don't I feel God? Why do I pray and nothing seems to happen? Why do I search, read, listen to messages, go to sacred places, but still feel an emptiness inside me?" And perhaps the answer is not that God has moved away. Perhaps the answer lies in the veil that covers perception, because the problem is not that the divine light has stopped shining. The problem is that consciousness has become accustomed to the shadow. The problem is not that the sacred temple has disappeared. The problem is that there is a layer of illusions between the human being and the inner altar. In temple tradition, the veil separated the common space from the most sacred place. It was like a boundary between what everyone could see and what could only be accessed with reverence, purity, and preparation. But when we look at this symbol inwardly, we realize something powerful. This veil also exists within the human soul. There is a deeper part of the being, a secret chamber, an inner holy of holies, where the presence of God is not just an idea, but a living reality. However, between the common mind and this sacred place, there is a tissue formed by illusions, beliefs, wounds, fears, memories, attachments, and false identities. And as long as this veil remains intact, one can talk about God, study about God, sing to God, think about God, but has not yet crossed over into the intimate experience of the divine presence. One of the first fibers of this veil is the false idea of separation. The person believes that God is infinitely far away, sitting somewhere far away, while he or she is down here, small, lost, unworthy, and isolated. It is clear that there is a difference between the creator and the creature, between the source and that which receives life from it. But Jesus revealed a closeness that many have not yet understood. He taught to call God Father. He spoke of the kingdom as something close at hand. He pointed to a living, interior, direct, transformative relationship. And when consciousness believes only in separation, it lives as a foreigner within the soul itself. She thinks she needs to scream to be heard by God, when perhaps she needs to be silent to realize that the presence was already closer than her own breath. This is a very important point. When Jesus says that the kingdom is near, he is not just talking about time. He is not just saying that something will come later, in some distant future. He is talking about inner closeness. The kingdom is close because it does not depend on geographic travel. It is not hidden behind mountains, deserts, or outer walls. The kingdom is near because it touches the center of being. It's closer than the thought you just had, more intimate than the beat of your heart, quieter than the breath that comes and goes without you noticing. But at the same time, it is more hidden than any treasure, because the scattered mind cannot see what only the awakened consciousness can recognize. Don't waste any more time living with this burden. Get the digital book, Censored Gospels, the words of Jesus that were removed now, and discover how to apply these powerful teachings in your daily life. Attention, stock is limited and running out quickly. Click now and start your journey towards the peace and confidence you deserve. Another fiber of this veil is the belief that you are just your body, your name, your story, and your wounds. From an early age, the world teaches us to build an identity based on external things. You are the name you were given. You are the way you look. You are the profession you practice. You are the family you came from. You are the trauma you suffered. You are the mistake you made. You are what they said about you. You are the image you need to maintain. But is that all? Is the human being just a walking biography, carrying memories, fears, desires, and scars? Spiritual teaching points to something deeper. There is a divine spark, an inner dimension, an image of God hidden beneath the layers of personality. The problem is that when a person completely identifies with their story, they cannot penetrate the veil. She remains attached to the character and forgets the essence. And that's why so many people approach spirituality just looking to improve their character. They want a little more peace to continue living in the same way. They want a prayer to ease their anxiety, but they don't want to discover the root of the restlessness. They want a word of comfort, but they don't want to let go of the identity built around pain. They want God to heal the wound, but sometimes they don't realize that they spent years using the wound as an identity. And this is very delicate, because there are real pains, deep wounds, marks that need care, compassion, and time. But the inner temple does not open as long as the person believes that it is just what happened to him. You may have lived a story, but you are not just your story. You can carry brands, but you don't need to turn your brands into a throne. You may have gone through losses, falls, and deserts, but there is something in you that was not born from these pains and will not be destroyed by them. Attachment to the past is also part of this veil. The past can become a kind of heavy curtain over the eyes of the soul. There are people who live mentally replaying old conversations, scenes old regrets, old betrayals, old decisions, as if they were trapped in a temple full of echoes. The body is in the present, but the consciousness is kneeling before memories. And when consciousness lives stuck in what was, it loses the ability to perceive the presence of God in the now, because the sacred is not found in a dead memory nor in an anxious imagination of the future. The encounter with God takes place in the living center of the present. But if the heart is clinging to what happened, if the mind is always returning to what was hurt, what was missing, what could have been, the veil remains closed. And there is still the need to be seen. This is a very modern veil, very current, very present in almost everyone's lives. A person cannot enter the inner temple because he lives in the window of the world. She asks herself all the time, are they noticing me? Are they admiring me? Are they approving of me? Are they realizing my worth? And the more she seeks to be seen from the outside, the less she can see from the inside. The need for approval creates a superficial spirituality because the person begins to confuse divine presence with human validation. She thinks she is growing spiritually when she receives applause. She thinks she is enlightened when others praise her. You think it has value when someone confirms it. But the inner temple is a place where masks cannot survive. To enter this sanctuary, one must accept being seen by God before wanting to be seen by men. And being seen by God is different, because in the face of the divine presence, there is no character that can be sustained. There is no appearance that can deceive. There is no beautiful speech that can replace the truth. The inability to remain silent is perhaps one of the strongest layers of this veil. Silence is scary because it removes distractions. In silence, the person can no longer escape the noise, the opinions of others, the excess of information, the rush, the ready-made explanations. In the silence, everything that was hidden begins to appear. That's why many say they want to find God, but they can't stand being with themselves. They want to hear the divine voice, but they fill every space in their lives with noise. They want spiritual discernment, but they feed their minds with confusion. They want to open the sacred temple, but keep the interior full of voices competing for the altar. And here's a deep secret. Silence is not empty. Silence is a door. It only seems empty to those who are still addicted to noise. But there is an even deeper layer to the veil, the fear of discovering who we really are. It may seem strange because everyone says they want self-knowledge, spiritual awakening, enlightenment, truth, the presence of God. But the truth doesn't just reveal beautiful things. It also shatters illusions. It shows where we are lying to ourselves. It shows where we confuse love with attachment, faith with fear, humility with inferiority, strength with control, spirituality with disguised pride. Discovering who we really are means letting what we pretend to be die, and that scares. It's scary because the false self, even though it's a prison, seems familiar. The mask, even though it is heavy, gives a feeling of protection. The lie, even though it hurts, gives a feeling of control. So many people stop at the veil because they feel deep down that crossing it will require real surrender. And this is where Jesus' teaching becomes profoundly transformative. He didn't just come to comfort the human being on the surface. He came to awaken what was sleeping deep down. He did not come just to decorate external life with sacred words. He came to reveal the way to the center, to the kingdom within, to the living presence of God in the temple of the soul. When he talks about being born again, about losing your life to find it, about cleaning the inside of the cup, about watching, praying, and entering the secret room, he is pointing to this crossing. He is showing that there is a veil between ordinary consciousness and divine consciousness, and that this veil will not be torn with just words, but with transformation. Perhaps now you begin to see why so many people have religion but no depth. They have words but no presence. They have rituals, but they do not have silence. They have knowledge, but they have no transformation. Not because the external sacred has no value, but because the external without interior crossing becomes only form. And the form may be beautiful, it may move, it may impress, but it does not replace the encounter with God in the secret sanctuary of consciousness. The physical temple may point to mystery, but the inner veil must be pierced within you. No one can cross this veil in your place. A master can indicate, a scripture can enlighten, a prayer can open the way, a word can awaken, but the perception needs to happen in your own soul, because Jesus didn't just reveal that there was a veil. He showed the way to tear it. And this path doesn't start outside. It doesn't begin with a distant journey, a secret ritual, a complicated formula, or an easy promise of instant transformation. The path begins when human beings accept to enter their own inner temple with courage, reverence, and truth. And here we come to an essential part of this teaching. If there is a hidden temple within you, if there is a sacred sanctuary in the center of your soul, then there are also keys to open that door. Jesus left these keys scattered in his teachings, in his gestures, in his silences, in his simplest and at the same time most profound words. But these keys do not work in the hands of those who only want spiritual curiosity. They work when someone is willing to change the way they see, feel, think, and exist. The first key is silence. But don't confuse silence with simply not talking. The silence we are talking about is much deeper. It is the inner silence. This is when the ego noise begins to subside. It's when the mind stops, even if just for a few moments, trying to control everything, explain everything, judge everything, desire everything, fear everything. True silence is not the absence of sound. It is interruption of the dominance of the false self, because the ego needs noise to survive. He needs opinions, comparisons, memories, fantasies, justifications, disputes, worries, distractions. The ego needs to keep its consciousness occupied so that the soul does not perceive the presence of God that dwells deep within. Have you ever noticed how difficult it is to truly be silent? Many people manage to remain silent on the outside, but inside there is a crowd talking. A voice accuses, another plans, another complains, another wants, another fears, another relives the past, another imagines the future. And in the midst of this internal market, the divine presence remains almost imperceptible, not because it is weak, but because attention is hijacked. That's why silence is a powerful key. In the silence, the masks begin to fall. The person begins to realize that many of the things they called self were just repeated noises. You begin to notice that much of what seemed like free will was conditioning. Much of what looked like faith was fear. Much of what seemed like love was attachment. Much of what looked like strength was defense. Silence does not create truth, he reveals. And that's why Jesus retired to lonely places. He didn't do it out of escape. He did not withdraw out of contempt for the world, nor out of weakness, nor out of empty isolation. He withdrew by alignment. He entered into silence to remain united with the Father, so as not to be swept away by the noise of the crowds, by the expectations of men, by external pressures, by wrong interpretations, by visible conflicts. This gesture is very profound. If Jesus himself sought silence, how can we think that our soul will awaken living only in noise? If he retired to pray, how can we imagine that the inner temple will open in a consciousness always distracted, always accelerated, always busy? Silence is the first key because it prepares the space. He doesn't force the door. It makes it possible to hear that the port exists. But there is something important. When you start practicing silence, don't expect to just find peace right away. Sometimes, before peace comes discomfort. Before the light, shadows appear. Before the presence, old voices appear. This is why many give up. They go into silence a little and say, "This isn't for me. My mind won't stop. I get restless. I feel strange." But that doesn't mean the silence failed. It means he began to reveal what was hidden. When you close the external doors, you realize what is happening inside the house. And perhaps, for the first time, you will be able to see the merchants, the veil, the masks, the wounds, the desires, and the false identities that occupied the sacred temple of your consciousness. The second key is vigilance. When Jesus says watch, many people think only of waiting for external signs, future events, difficult times, prophecies, or changes in the world. But there is an even more intimate and transformative surveillance. Watching yourself. Watching is not living in fear. Watching is living awake. It's observing what happens inside before being dominated by it. It's perceiving a thought before believing it. It's realizing a desire before obeying it. It's noticing an emotion before becoming a slave to it. Vigilance is the light of consciousness lit within the temple. Without supervision, the person lives automatically. She feels angry and becomes angry, feel fear and become fear, feel desire and obey desire, feel guilt and kneel before guilt. You feel anxiety and chase all the images that anxiety creates. But whoever begins to watch realizes that there is a sacred distance between what appears within and what we really are. A thought appears, but you don't need to become that thought. An emotion rises, but you don't need to hand over the throne of the soul to it. An impulse calls, but you can observe before acting. This small distance is the beginning of the awakening of consciousness, and see how this connects to the inner temple. If your mind is filled with any thought that appears, then any merchant comes in and sets up his table. If your heart obeys any desire, then any force occupies the altar. If your emotions govern all your decisions, then the sanctuary is always unstable, always agitated, always vulnerable. Vigilance is like the inner priest who keeps watch at the door of the temple. She asks, does this thought come from the light or the shadow? Does this desire bring me closer to God or take me away from myself? Does this emotion need to be heard, or is it trying to overwhelm me? Is this reaction born of truth or hurt? Understand, monitoring is not repressing. It is not hating thoughts, desires, or emotions. It is observing with lucidity. It's bringing light to what previously moved in the shadows. Whoever watches himself begins to awaken, because he is no longer just a creature pushed by invisible forces. The person begins to notice their patterns. You realize that you always react the same way when you feel rejected. You realize that you always try to control when you feel afraid. You realize that you always seek approval when you feel empty. You realize that you always return to the past when you don't want to face the present. You realize that you always wear a mask when you are afraid of being real. And this perception is sacred because that which is seen with consciousness begins to lose the power to govern in secret. The light doesn't need to scream, it just reveals. The third key is perhaps the most difficult to accept: symbolic death. And here we need to be very careful to understand it well. We are not talking about physical death, nor the destruction of life, nor contempt for existence. We are talking about the death of the false self, the death of masks, the death of the identity built by fear, vanity, wounds, pride, and the world. Jesus taught that it is necessary to lose the false life to find the true life. This is one of the most profound messages of the spiritual path, because the inner temple is not open to those who just want to improve their personality. He opens himself to anyone who is willing to go through the death of the false self. Many people want spirituality as an ornament. You want a little peace, a little prosperity, a little protection, a little comfort, but without touching the deep structure of the ego. You want to continue being the same person, with the same attachments, the same vanities, the same fears, the same masks, just with a more spiritual language. But Jesus didn't just come to improve the old man's appearance. He came to reveal a new life. And for this life to be born, something needs to die. The vanity that demands to be admired all the time needs to die. The need for control that tries to take the place of trust needs to die. The wounded identity that clings to pain as if pain were its only name needs to die. The I manufactured by the world needs to die. This character that was created with other people's opinions, traumas, expectations, fears, comparisons, and passing desires. This symbolic death hurts because the false self does not give up easily. He will try to negotiate. It will say, you can seek God, but don't touch that pride. You can pray, but you still need to control everything. You can talk about light, but don't touch that old hurt. You can study sacred teachings, but don't let go of the need to be superior. You can enter the temple, but leave my tables inside. And this is where the journey becomes real, because opening the hidden temple is not just a beautiful experience, it is a deep purification. It is allowing that which does not belong to the sacred to be removed. It's going through the discomfort of stopping being who you pretended to be and finally getting closer to who you are before God. Dying to vanity is stopping living by asking the world for permission to exist. It's stopping turning your own life into a stage. It's accepting being simple, true, silent, even when no one is applauding. Dying to control is recognizing that the human mind cannot hold all the threads of life. It's exchanging constant tension for conscious confidence. Not a naive trust, but a lucid surrender, a living faith, an openness to divine direction. To die to a wounded identity is to stop using the past as a prison. It's honoring pain, yes, but without allowing it to define the altar of your soul. It's saying, this happened to me, but that's not all I am. And dying to the world-made self is perhaps the most profound crossing, because it requires letting go of the image you spent years trying to uphold. These three keys work together. Silence reveals, surveillance illuminates, symbolic death frees. Silence shows the noise of the ego. Surveillance recognizes your movements. I love symbolic art, withdraws its dominance. Without silence, you don't listen. Without surveillance, you don't notice. Without symbolic death, you don't cross. And when these three keys begin to turn within the soul, something changes. A person no longer seeks God just as an idea. It no longer treats spirituality as content, appearance, or discourse. She begins to feel that there is a real door within her, an inner passage, a deep place where the divine presence is not theory, but life. Don't waste any more time living with this burden. Get the digital book, Censored Gospels, the words of Jesus that were removed, now, and discover how to apply these powerful teachings in your daily life. Attention! Stock is limited and running out quickly. Click now and start your journey towards the peace and confidence you deserve. And maybe you're wondering, how do I start? Start small, but start truthfully. Separate moments to silence not just your mouth, but your inner rush. Observe your thoughts, like someone watching clouds passing by without believing them all. Watch your desires before giving up your peace in exchange for fleeting pleasure. Pay attention to emotions before turning them into definitive decisions. And most importantly, ask yourself, what part of me needs to die so that something truer can be born? This question is strong. It breaks through the surface. She touches the temple. Because often, it is not God who is distant, it is the false self that is getting in the way. And when these keys begin to work, when the silence deepens, when vigilance awakens, when the false self begins to lose its throne, man discovers something that can completely change his outlook on life. He discovers that inside the inner temple there is a secret chamber, a deep, intimate, silent place that cannot be reached by haste, vanity, superficial curiosity, or the simple repetition of sacred words. This chamber is not a physical space. It is not a room hidden somewhere in the body. It is not a fantasy created by the imagination. It is a spiritual perception. It is the deepest center of being, where the soul begins to recognize the divine presence not as a theory, but as a living reality. It is there that the human being stops just hearing about God and begins to realize, with reverence, that there was a divine spark dormant within him from the beginning. But we need to tread carefully here, because this is a very deep point, and also a very misunderstood one. When we talk about Christ within, we are not saying in a shallow way that man simply becomes God, or that the human ego becomes absolute. This is a dangerous confusion. The Christ within is not the spiritualized ego. It is not the ordinary personality using beautiful words to feel divine. It is not the person placing themselves above others, as if they had reached a state of superiority. It is not a crown for vanity. It is not an enlightenment title. It is not a fantasy of spiritual greatness. The Christ within is the recognition of the image and likeness that was covered by layers of fear, pride, guilt, attachment, and ignorance. It is consciousness beginning to remember its sacred origin. It is the divine light being perceived deep in the soul, not to feed pride, but to dissolve it. This difference is essential, because many people talk about spiritual awakening, Christ consciousness, the inner temple, the divine presence, but they still remain stuck in the need to appear special. And when this happens, the person has not entered the secret chamber. She just decorated the door with mystical words. The true chamber of secrets does not inflate the self. She empties it. It does not make a person arrogant, makes it simpler. does not make it cold, makes it more compassionate. Don't make it distant, makes it more true. The closer someone gets to this sacred center, the less they need to prove something to the world, less needs to win arguments, less needs to be seen as profound. You need to impose your spirituality less. There is less need to carry a mask of holiness. Because whoever really touches the divine presence within begins to understand that the sacred does not need to be displayed to exist. And perhaps this is one of the clearest signs that someone has begun to recognize this secret chamber. Life is becoming simpler, but not emptier. On the contrary, simplicity becomes full of presence. The person begins to perceive God in places where they previously only saw routine. You begin to see the sacred in the silence of the morning, in conscious breathing, in the act of forgiving, in the courage to tell the truth, in the ability to not react as before, in the care for others, in the prayer that does not need an audience, in the decision to no longer feed an old shadow. The inner temple is no longer just a pretty idea for a video, it becomes a way of living. And that's when spirituality stops being appearance and begins to become transformation. The Chamber of Secrets is the place where the human being recognizes that his life is not just a sequence of external events. He realizes that there is an inner dimension where everything takes on another meaning. Pain stops being just punishments or meaningless accidents and begins to be seen as doors of learning if they are crossed with awareness. Losses stop being just absence and begin to reveal what was attachment, what was dependence, what was illusion. Silence stops being a threat and begins to be a home. Prayer stops being just a request and begins to be an encounter. Faith stops being just a repeated belief and begins to be living trust. And the inner Christ, that sacred presence recognized deep within the soul, does not appear as a spectacle, but as a discrete light that reorganizes everything within. In the Gnostic view, this is very important. Salvation is not just an external belief, mental acceptance, memorized information, or religious affiliation. Salvation is living knowledge, but not knowledge in the common sense, like someone who accumulates phrases, theories, names, symbols, and concepts. Spiritual knowledge, Gnosis, is direct experience. It is awakening consciousness. It's knowing why you became, why you crossed, because you saw inside. This is when the truth stops being something repeated on the lips and begins to be recognized by the soul. And this knowledge does not serve to decorate the mind. It serves to transform the being. Therefore, on the interior path, it is not enough to know sacred words. You have to go through them. It's not enough to talk about light. You have to allow the light to reveal the shadows. It is not enough to repeat that the kingdom is within. You have to enter. And entering this secret chamber requires profound humility. Because no one enters there as a character. Nobody comes in carrying trophies. No one enters with the need to be admired. No one walks through this door with the pride of thinking they are more awake than others. In the face of the divine presence, everything that is false begins to lose consistency. Therefore, sometimes the encounter with the sacred within does not come as an explosion of emotion, but as a silent clarity. The person simply realizes, I lived far from myself for a long time. I confused my essence with my wounds. I confused God with ideas. I confused faith with fear. I confused spirituality with appearance. I confused the temple with the facade. And this realization, as simple as it may seem, can be more powerful than any grand experience. Because true sacredness doesn't always arrive with a bang. Sometimes it comes as a peace that does not require explanation. Like a lucidity that doesn't need to defend itself. Like a compassion that is born without effort. Like a desire to live in a cleaner, more conscious, more aligned way. Like a quiet courage to abandon what previously seemed indispensable. The person does not become perfect, but he becomes more awakened. It is not without challenges, but it is no longer so easily governed by them. You don't stop feeling emotions, but you begin to observe them more consciously. He does not stop living in the world, but he no longer belongs completely to the currents of the world. And here is a phrase that needs to be recorded. The sign that someone has found the secret chamber is not to speak like a master, but to live without being governed by the currents of the world. This changes everything, because there are people who know many sacred texts, but are slaves to approval. There are people who talk about God, but are governed by anger. There are people who master spiritual symbols, but cannot love simply. There are people who argue about truth, but are afraid to look inside. And there are simple, silent, discreet people who may not even know how to explain great mysteries, but carry a different presence. They don't need to convince, they don't need to show off, they don't need to shout that they have woken up. There is a gentle firmness in them, a light without ostentation, a depth without arrogance. These people have perhaps come closer to the Chamber of Secrets than many who only talk about it. And when someone recognizes this inner presence, they also begin to better understand Jesus' words about the secret room. Entering the room, closing the door and praying to the Father in secret is not just external guidance to a physical place of prayer, it is also an inner map. Closing the door means withdrawing your senses, silencing the need for appearance, suspending the search for applause, abandoning the theater of the world for a few moments. Praying in secret is entering that space where there is no audience, where no one needs to know, where the soul presents itself naked before God. And the Father who sees in secret is not just observing external actions. He sees the heart, the intentions, the deepest movements of consciousness. He sees what not even the person himself can fully explain. In this chamber, the prayer changes. It stops being just a list of requests and becomes a listener. Stop negotiating tian and becomes delivery. It stops being fear in disguise and becomes confidence. The soul no longer prays just to receive things, but to be transformed. She no longer just asks, Lord, change my situation. Begin to ask, Lord, change my vision. Purify my interior. Show what still occupies your temple within me. Teach me to recognize your presence in the silence. This prayer has another weight. It comes from a deeper place. She does not try to use God to strengthen her ego. It allows God to cut through the ego to reveal something truer. And that doesn't mean running away from the world. This is another common mistake. Entering the inner temple is not abandoning life, despising people, rejecting responsibilities, or living as if the world doesn't matter. On the contrary, the more someone touches the secret chamber, the more their relationship with the world transforms. The person begins to act more consciously, speak less on impulse, listen more deeply, reacts with less poison, forgive with more maturity, choose more clearly, love without so much possession. It serves without much need for recognition. He walks without being in such a rush to prove his worth. Inner spirituality, when it is true, does not keep a person away from life. It purifies the way a person lives. But there is a danger on the way, turning the inner temple into another prison of the ego. And perhaps this is one of the most subtle traps of every spiritual journey, because in the beginning, the ego tries to stop the person from seeking God. He uses distractions, fears, desires, guilt, vanity, busyness, worries, and excuses. He says, "Not now. You don't have time. This is too deep. This isn't for you. Keep living like you always have." But when it realizes that it can no longer stop the search, when it sees that the person has begun to silence, watch, pray, study, awaken, and look within, the ego changes its strategy. He stops fighting spirituality and tries to dress in it. He takes sacred words, mystical symbols, teachings of Jesus, ideas about consciousness, light, inner temple, inner Christ and divine presence, and begins to use all of these to remain in control. This is where the spiritual ego is born, And the spiritual ego is dangerous because it looks like light, but it is still vanity. It seems like wisdom, but it is still a need for superiority. It seems to awaken, but it is still attachment to one's own image. One can stop taking pride in money, appearance, status, or material achievements, but begin to take pride in sacred knowledge, spiritual experiences, deep interpretations, inner practices, and a sense of being above others. She exchanges material pride for spiritual pride. Before, he felt better because he had more things. Now you feel better because you think you know more, understand more, see more, have awakened more. But deep down, the structure is the same. The old ego just changed its clothes. Before, I wore worldly clothes. Now he wears temple clothes. And this is very serious because a person can start talking about humility without being humble. You can speak of light, but reject your own shadows. You can talk about love, but treat others coldly. You can talk about an awakened conscience, but continue to react with pride when contradicted. You can talk about God within yourself, but not be able to recognize God in others. You can talk about the inner Christ, but live trapped in the need to be admired as someone special. You may repeat words like enlightenment, divine presence, gnosis, spiritual awakening, and sacred temple, but still be deeply attached to vanity. And then the path that was supposed to free becomes a new form of prison. The ego is so cunning that when it cannot stop someone from seeking God, it tries to convince him that he has already become God. This phrase needs to go deep because it reveals a trap that many don't realize. A true encounter with God does not transform a human being into someone arrogant, cold, superior, and distant. True contact with the divine presence makes a person simpler, more conscious, more compassionate, more truthful, more careful with words, more attentive to their own internal movements. When someone approaches the inner temple, they do not feel the need to step on others to prove that they have reached further. On the contrary, you begin to understand that everyone is in process. Everyone carries veils. Everyone fights with internal traders. Everyone needs mercy. Everyone needs light. The true temple does not open to arrogance disguised as enlightenment. He does not open himself to those who want to use God as a medal. It is not open to those who transform spiritual knowledge on stage. It is not open to those who seek sacred teachings just to win arguments, impress people, or feed the fantasy of being superior. The inner temple opens with humility, and humility is not despising yourself. It is not diminishing yourself. It is not denying the divine spark. Humility is recognizing the truth without exaggerating the size itself. It is knowing that there is light in you, but that this light is not the property of the ego. It is understanding that the divine presence was not given to make you greater than others, but to make you more faithful to love, more awakened to the truth, and more free from the chains of the world. Many people get lost exactly at this point. They start well. They feel a real calling. They look for answers, read sacred texts. They meditate, pray. They study the teachings of Jesus. They realize that there is a hidden temple within the soul. They begin to move away from certain distractions. They feel internal changes. But little by little, without supervision, they begin to build a new identity around it. Before they said, "I am what I have achieved." Now they say, even without words, "I am what I discovered." Before they wanted applause for their appearance. Now they want applause for their depth. Before they wanted to be seen as important. Now they want to be seen as enlightened. And this is how vanity enters the temple again, no longer as a common merchant, but dressed as a priestess. That's why Jesus pointed so much to simplicity, to the heart, to the secret, to the inner truth. He did not teach a path of spiritual display. He didn't say, "Show the world how high you are." He pointed to the secret room, to the prayer that does not seek an audience, to the purity of intention, to the love that serves without needing to announce it, to the light that shines naturally, not as a spectacle, but as a consequence of an aligned life. The path of Jesus is not religious theater or mystical performance. It's back to the center. It is a return to the inner home. It is the human being ceasing to live as a foreigner within himself. And perhaps herein lies one of the most important differences between spiritual knowledge and spiritual transformation. Knowledge can be accumulated. Transformation needs to be experienced. A person can know how to talk about the inner temple and not yet have entered it. You can explain the veil and still be hidden behind it. You can describe the merchants and still trade with them every day. You can talk about silence and not being able to stand being alone. You can talk about the death of the false self and protecting your own pride with all your strength. He can talk about the Christ within and still act as if the entire world should recognize his greatness. Therefore, the true sign is not in the speech. It's in life. It's in the way a person reacts when they are hurt. It's in the way he treats those who can't offer anything. It's in the way you deal with criticism. It's in the way he loves when he doesn't receive applause. It lies in the ability to remain true when no one is watching. Talking about light is easy. It's difficult to allow the light to reveal our shadows. Talking about love is beautiful. It's difficult to love when the ego wants to win. Talking about humility is emotional. It is difficult to practice humility when someone contradicts us. Talking about spiritual awakening attracts attention. It is difficult to truly awaken and realize that there is still a lot within us that needs to be purified. And it is precisely this honesty that protects the hiker. The truly awakened person is not the one who believes he has reached the end. It is one that remains vigilant, open, teachable, aware that the inner temple needs to be guarded every day. Because the merchants might try to come back. Fear can return under another name. Guilt may return with another voice. Vanity can return disguised as a mission. Anxiety can return disguised as responsibility. The ego can return disguised as wisdom. That's why the journey isn't just about opening the temple once, and that's it. It's staying awake. It's keeping the flame burning. It's cleaning the altar when necessary. It is recognizing when the noise begins to occupy the sacred space again. It's about returning to silence, return to surveillance, return to humility, back to love, return to the center. And love here is fundamental, because without love, any spirituality becomes dry, hard, proud, and dangerous. Love is the sign that the inner temple has not been hijacked by the ego. Not a sentimental and fragile love, but a conscious, firm, true love, capable of seeing the other without contempt. A love that doesn't need to agree with everything, but also doesn't need to hate. A love that does not place itself as superior, but also does not diminish itself. A love that is born from the divine presence recognized within. When one enters deeper into the temple, one begins to realize that God is not an idea to be used against others. God is a presence that transforms the way we see everything, the way we see ourselves, the way we see our wounds, the way we see who hurt us, the way we see the world. And maybe now the whole journey will start to make sense. First, human beings look for God outside, cross deserts, search for signs, temples, rituals, words, and masters, without realizing that they carry a sacred door inside their own chest. Then he discovers that this inner temple is occupied by a merchant ease. Fear, guilt, ego, vanity, disordered desire, and anxiety. Then you perceive the invisible veil that separates ordinary consciousness from the divine presence, a veil made of illusions, false identities, attachment to the past, and inability to silence. Then find the three keys left by Jesus: silence, vigilance, and symbolic death. And when these keys begin to act, one approaches the secret chamber, the deep place where the divine spark, the dormant image and likeness begins to be recognized. But at the end of this journey, the last test arises, not turning all of this into food for the ego, because perhaps the temple you seek was never lost. Maybe he just remained closed off, waiting for the moment when you stopped running away from yourself. Maybe God was never as far away as you imagined. Perhaps the problem was never the absence of the divine presence, but the excess of noise, fear, pride, distraction, wounds, masks, and attachment. Jesus didn't just come to point to the sky above us. He came to reveal the heaven hidden within us, not as fantasy, not as spiritual vanity, not as an escape from the world, but as a return to the deepest truth of being. And if there is one message that remains from this journey, it is this: the inner temple opens with humility, silence, truth, and love. It cannot be opened by force. It doesn't open up due to arrogance. Don't open in a hurry. It does not open up due to the need to appear enlightened. It opens when the soul gets tired of living on the surface and decides to return home. It opens when human beings stop transforming God into a concept and allow the divine presence to transform their hearts. It opens up when you understand that the greatest pilgrimage is not to cross the world, but to cross yourself.